This is a Relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
Welcome to the show on this Monday. We're a week away from Christmas. Jesperson and Hicks. In just a second, David Knight Legg. Then Charles Adler will join us. We'll cover a lot of ground today. We'll take a look back at COP. We'll talk about Canada's emissions reduction strategy and why, generally speaking, our leadoff guest this morning, former principal advisor to the former Premier of Alberta, Jason Kenney, describes it as a failure, quite frankly. He says that Canada's scolding the rest of the world instead of including India and China, instead of recognizing economic opportunity and doing something meaningful with natural resources. Canada's essentially spinning its tires. We'll get into that. The former president of the United States making the ridiculous comments about immigrants, quote, poisoning the blood of the United States. Charles Adler, I know, will want to tee up what Donald Trump has to say, and we're going to get into maybe what for some people might be uncomfortable territory today. We're really going to make you think and ask you how you feel about the Canada Border Services Agency recommending that the driver that caused that horrific Humboldt Broncos bus crash, that he be deported. He was paroled earlier this year, and the CBSA recommending that Jaskirat Singh Sidhu be sent back to India. He wants to stay in Canada. He was a permanent resident. He can still apply to remain on compassionate grounds. Adler's known for his brand of Canadian common sense. I wonder where he'll land on this one. We'll look to our live chat, and of course I expect that we'll get some emails on that this week as well to talk at ryanjesperson.com. This episode of the show is presented by our friends at Rello, and with a week to go until the holidays, this seems like a perfect time if you're still looking for that gift for somebody in your life that's tough to buy for, but the one thing you know is that they're keen on the idea of a career in real estate. They're dreaming of starting their own new career, being their own boss, maybe unlimited earning potential. You can get them started today. What a great and thoughtful Christmas gift to cover their training at Rello.ca. It's Alberta's top real estate school, and they like to support their students every single step of the way, from studying for the exam, getting the license, to practice real estate and beyond. Plus, with Rello, you can study 100% online, so it's going to work with your schedule no matter what. And here's the deal. Again, with a week to go until Christmas, with a special promo code exclusively for Real Talkers, you can knock 20% off the cost of a course at Rello.ca. Just use the promo code REALTALK. That's all one word, REALTALK, at Rello.ca. David Knight Legg is a name probably most familiar to Albertans for a couple of recent roles. He was principal advisor to Premier Jason Kenney a few years ago, advising the Premier on Alberta's tax, economic development, financing, and jobs strategy. He was the CEO for a brief time of Invest Alberta. He's currently working as a strategic advisor to governments, energy, and tech firms through the Fintechs Group in San Francisco as chairman of Elements Advisors, a global fund advisory firm based in Asia. It's been a while since so-called DKL and I have connected. It's nice to see your face again, man. Happy holidays to you.
Hey, good to see you. Hey, congrats on 5 million, what is it, downloads or viewers? I couldn't figure it out.
Yeah, it was 5 million downloads on the podcast and about another 2.5 million on YouTube. So 3 years in, 7.5, averaging 2.5 a year. We're pretty excited about that.
Where's the other 30 million Canadians? What are they doing?
I don't know what man. We're trying to figure that out every single day. What the hell is going on? Maybe we need to buy more billboards. I think that's got to be it.
It has to go viral. You got to start with all the smart people first, and then let it cascade down to the guys that are, watching the other stuff.
Yeah, that's right. We got to start with the decision makers. As we say, it's the show for movers and shakers. Make sure we get all the decision makers appearing on the show and listening to the show, and then maybe some lowbrow stuff too. That's the stuff that gets 10 million views at a time, right?
Well, that's why I'm here. I'm here to bring in the lowbrow a little bit.
Yeah, appreciate that. Hey, what's changed in the world since, when you were advising Kenney in 2019? That was kind of like basically the beginning of his tenure as Alberta's premier. Obviously kind of swept in and formed government, and then the province, according to conservatives, people would say corrected itself politically, and Kenney obviously had a big mess on his hands right out of the gates, as did many others. COVID kind of comes in. There's huge global economic implications. It feels like an eternity ago, but it was 4 years ago or so. How much or how dramatically has the change been since then?
Look, I think everybody's dealing with some after effects of COVID in their household, probably with friends, and I think that's true institutionally as well. If you look at what's happened with inflation, what happened to supply chains, and actually the climate, energy, economy debate that we're having right now is tied into that. Through COVID, you had a dramatic reduction in global emissions because you had a dramatic reduction in economic momentum, and now that the economy's back, you're seeing the highest levels of coal, gas, and oil use ever this past year. And COP28 took place with that backdrop, and so I think a lot's changed. I think I think we're dealing with some of the after effects of that, but I think we also have to look forward and figure out what we can do in the world. And Alberta's got this extraordinary potential. Canada has this extraordinary potential to do so much. We could be the first nation that's completely carbon neutral because of just how unique Canada is in the world in terms of our location, our trade relationships, the advantages of being the fourth largest gas producer on the planet, the advantages of having some of the best technology for CCUS, carbon capture, clean tech, and my sort of fingers crossed that we become the global leader in small modular nuclear as well. But the thing that really motivated that article that got us talking about being on the show, Ryan, was just watching Canada play this weird role of lecturing China and India on coal, which is just so embarrassing. China and India responded to it, but it's just embarrassing. So it's weak. It's kind of being the Nurse Cratchit of COP28. There was no point in doing it unless the intention. Well, I was actually hopeful when I first read the headline. I thought maybe there'll be an intention to talk about what we've done with Shell and what we can do with the rest of our gas reserves to decarbonize the Asian grid, which is the single most important opportunity in the planet right now. Gilbo's half right that coal's a huge problem, but the place where he's wrong is that he has no plan for Canada to do anything about this. And the world doesn't need another letter saying coal is a bad thing. It needs a solution. And we've got this unique capacity to be a solution. So that article was sort of a final straw for me. I was actually in Hong Kong when I read the news, and I've spent 15 years in Asia. And knowing what Canada can do and what Canada's not doing, especially in light of the fact that this current domestic-only strategy, targeting only 1.5% of our own domestic emissions, is complete failure right now. It hasn't achieved anything. I mean, when they first instituted this after signing the Paris Accord in 2015, by 2019, emissions had gone up. I mean, how does this make any sense, right? This is the most. I mean, the Liberal Party is the most committed of the parties to trying to do something about climate. The reason they're failing isn't because they're bad people or because they don't get it. It's because Canada is a very unique place to try and cut emissions for. But also, Canada's a rounding error. We're 1.5% of global emissions. We used to be over 2% of global emissions. Our emissions have dropped as a percentage of global emissions because the rest of the world is radically increasing their use of carbon-intensive fuels. And in the absence of us getting in the game and trading gas, we're not doing anything serious about the emissions from coal. So Gilbo recognized that, but then dropped the ball on it by not offering Canada to do anything about it in a substantive way. And so that really got my goat. I'm trying to stay out of most political things except on the side, but I had to write this because it just drives me nuts. And the world needs us, and we can do it. And the scale of the opportunity is enormous if we're actually serious and not trying to just make this a performative, divisive political football to play at home.
It got people's attention. If people haven't read it, it was published December 14th. Your piece in the National Post. If Guilbeault actually cared about coal burning, he'd back natural gas. You don't really, though, expect him to, do you? Like the way that he's wired. I mean, I think Guilbeault has kind of established himself, based on his background pre-politics, or at least pre-serving in this ministry, and his general comments and his general perspective. People can look at whatever sample they like. It could be his negotiations or his comments with the province of Alberta and getting Alberta's grid to net zero by 2035. You talk to the provincial government here, they say there's no way, no how. They're not even trying, basically, and the Sovereignty Act thing that's flared up as a result of that. But Guilbeault, do you expect him really to go to a conference like COP28 and champion natural gas. I know that Alberta would love to see it. I know that the oil and gas sector would love to see it, but I don't know. For some reason, maybe I'm just cynical. I don't expect that at all.
Look, I think on both. I think whatever political stripe you come from, the point when you take on a leadership role for the federal government of Canada is to provide a leadership view on what Canada can do in the world. And I think that in some ways, there's this phrase in American politics that only Nixon could go to China because Nixon was such an obvious skeptic. And it was under Nixon and Kissinger that you actually had the first beginning of the thaw with China. And everybody said, if these guys will do it, then clearly it's a good idea. I think Stéphane Gilbeau, if he looks at the math and frankly quits hiding the ball on how poorly we're doing right now in this current domestic emission strategy. I mean, look at their 2023 progress report. They use a 2019 baseline for a Paris Accord progress report, which has a baseline of 2005. Why are they doing that? He's stuck in this situation where he has to continue to hide the ball on the failure of the current domestic only strategy. He could be the best guy for Canada to actually build a bridge, have the conversations, do the math, and talk about the science. He was just in China. What was the purpose of being in China if all we're going to do is send them our coal and not our gas? So I do think it's incumbent on him, it's incumbent on any leader to try and figure out where the middle ground is. But the sad thing is, no matter what he does about the emissions cap in Alberta, the stakes are just so low. China in 1 year will exceed our entire 1 year of coal burning in China this coming year will exceed the entire 25-year domestic emissions reduction plan of Stéphane Gilbeau. In other words, we're completely irrelevant in the global emissions reduction strategy. There's no point. So COP28 is like Woodstock for like sustainability officers and environment ministers. They love it. They go there. But he made two announcements. One was to be the nurse Cratchit lecturing the world on why coal is bad when Canada is a place with only 38 million people, a clean grid, and only 7% coal use. If you're China and it was 73% or India was 68% coal use, because it's cheap, it's affordable, and you're managing 3 billion people, another 600 million of whom are trying to move out of grinding poverty into the middle class, which is why over the last 20 years, we've seen this massive increase in global emissions because of the huge anti-poverty movement, which I think will go down in history as the most important thing that happened in our generation. What's Canada doing? Are we there to help? Or are we just there to sort of be a sidebar lecture on the fact that coal is bad, which everybody already knew and everyone's looking for solutions to? So look, I'm very hopeful that if it's not Stéphane Gilbeau, if you can't see a broader opportunity for Canada than a domestic bun fight over emissions reductions that are a rounding error, then then eventually Canadians will get tired of it, but the world's already tired of it. Nobody is looking at what's happening in Canada emissions-wise or climate-wise and thinking that it's leadership. It's not. It hasn't worked domestically, so we're not leading on that front. And we're not offering anything outside of our borders when we have this enormous resource, incredible technology, and all these other things that actually the Paris Accord in Article 4 and Article 8 makes explicit is the purpose of trade, technology, and global emissions reduction. We know that most nations don't have our gas reserves, so what are they supposed to do? Wait for us to get with the program?
You've a few times in our interview been obviously sort of dismissed Canada's emissions reduction efforts. You sort of poo-pooed them and you haven't called them a failure, but you're implying that they are. Take us into your perspective there, and what do you think would mark meaningful progress on that? Why are you giving it a failing grade right now?
Look, I think there's three ways to look at it. The first way is Canada has had an incredible run economically and in terms of population growth. And if you look at the fact that we've kept our emissions relatively flat in spite of those two things, that's a real accomplishment. And that's something that we should be talking about as a nation. And it's something that for whatever reason, I don't know why we're not talking about it. It's a real accomplishment. Second thing is we haven't achieved anywhere near the domestic emissions reduction that you've seen happen in the United States and Europe. We're way behind all peer countries on these things. This is not because we're not trying or because we don't care. This is because Canada is a very, very unique place. We only have 38 million people. We're in the second largest landmass in the planet. It's vast It's cold. Our cities are distributed across this landmass through huge logistics networks of transport, air, truck, rail, right? We are also one of the world's most important deposits of minerals, gas, oil, agriculture. We feed the planet and we fuel the planet. And that is the nature of how these things break down. Other nations wish they had just a small amount of this. I was just in Washington, D.C. for an event, and somebody was at this dinner party, and they said, tell us about Alberta. And I said, okay, here's 3 fun facts that everybody in the United States doesn't know about Alberta. Number one, we have more oil than the United States and Russia and China combined. We are your strategic petroleum reserve. Number two, we have now got the cleanest barrels of oil, cleaner than California, because the number one decarbonization effort in the planet in oil production took place in Canada over the last 20 years, because we had the task of trying to draw our energy out of this viscous oil sands. And as a result, we've innovated, and entrepreneurs have funded the innovations that have reduced our barrels by 40%. So if you don't like our oil, then you definitely have to cancel California oil because it's more carbon intensive, right? So we're bigger than you think, we're cleaner than you think, and we're a critical part of the total strategic reserve opportunity for the United States and for Western Europe and for NATO, especially as we're fighting now Venezuela going after Guyana, Iran sponsoring Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, and Russia invading Ukraine. 3 places where the American administration in the last 3 years has lifted sanctions to allow their oil into the markets because they're worried about the inflationary effect of the lack of energy that's in the markets right now, given the post-COVID demand. Huge foreign policy mistakes that are having real consequences. And at the same time, they're not doing enough to build the bridge between Canada and the United States on these petroleum reserves. The third fun fact, if it wasn't enough that only 4.5 million people have more oil than the United States, China, and Russia, which makes us effectively the wealthiest place in the planet in terms of resources, we're also the 4th largest gas producer after the United States, Iran, and Russia. So, and the gas is the part that's most important if you look at what we can do to actually decarbonize the grid. The decarbonization of the grid in the United States happened principally, the lion's share of all that decarbonization, 800 million tons of decarbonization, now annually lower than it was in 2005 in the baseline, happened because of the replacement of gas on the coal-fired grid in the United States. Now, why didn't we do that in Canada? Because we already had a clean grid. Our grid is so dependent already on hydro and gas that we weren't able to achieve that reduction the way the United States did. The same thing happened in Europe. Now, Europe made a mistake in that the way that they tried to decarbonize the grid was to rely on Russia, to the point that 45% of all the gas going into Europe by the time Russia invaded Ukraine was coming out of, was going to Western Europe in a way that just defeated their ability to respond effectively to Russian aggression in Crimea and now. So look, I just think we have an extraordinary opportunity where we're far bigger. We punch way higher, we punch way above our weight, but we're simply not taking advantage of the opportunities in front of us strategically in global security, energy security, or to actually reduce emissions. And I think we just have to get with the program soon. The world is in too serious a place to reduce all these conversations, these sad domestic disputes that have Alberta and Ottawa food fight, having this family feud over these very, very minor opportunities to reduce emissions when the biggest opportunities are in front of us.
If you're just tuning in, live streaming this audio on the Mixler audio app presented by California Closets, we're talking to David Knight Legg. Erica is watching us on YouTube, says David's bang on. Decarbonizing Asia is not only the best way to help the environment, it also offers the greatest economic opportunities. It seems like a no-brainer. And then, David, you got your critics on the live chat as well. Justin calling.
Let's hear from those guys.
Well, yeah, I mean, Justin says this is a tired argument. China's worse than us, so why should we bother? Sylvia just says, so like, what's this guy's solution? I think your solution is probably like a global climate strategy, right? Your solution is to make available, market, and sell more natural gas to Asia from Canada, right? I mean, is that it in one sentence?
Yeah, look, I appreciate the critics, and I keep saying, like, I'd love to be debunked on these things. I want to get to the right answer. I don't want us to reduce this to domestic talking points, right? I think the whole climate, energy, environment, economy discussion needs a lot of open, honest debate. I think there's three parts to a solution. The first one is we've got to ditch this sad domestic-only climate strategy for something that's global, because global emissions are borderless, right? First, I think that's the first single most important thing. Second, I think we've got to be honest about what Canada is, all these attributes that we have that make it very hard for us to get water from a stone by trying to reduce the 1.5% of emissions we have, and look at what Canada's got. So if we ironically are trying to reduce emissions by shutting down gas production in Canada because of domestic emissions, but we're missing the opportunity for that gas production to massively reduce emissions in China by replacing coal, then we're making a huge strategic mistake if the goal is global emissions reduction. And so I think we need a global strategy versus a domestic strategy. I think the second thing that we need to do is get very collaborative. I don't think we need to reduce this to domestic political fights. We're already divided as a nation in various ways. We need to have a process or a mechanism for starting to put together a much more collaborative approach. I went through this with Dow. We can talk about that. Dow just did $11 billion deal here. That deal has been 3 years in the making. And Ryan, I wrote an op-ed on this back in March 2021 when I was having this huge fight with the federal environment minister's office over their intention to use the word toxic to describe 6 household benign plastic goods, including plastic straws. And this was insane, right? This made no sense at all. It had a huge second order effect, which is apparently, they told me this, it polled well out east. But the problem was we were killing our advanced chemistry industry here in Canada by using that crazy language. That language didn't make sense. You can't put a benign household item like plastic in the same categories cyanide or arsenic, but they were intent on doing it, and they wouldn't do it through legislation, so they passed it through Canadian Environmental Protection Act, CEPA. And I wrote this article saying this is going to fail. It just failed in the federal courts, and we just landed the Dow deal off the back of the fact that it's now been determined that it was, in the words of the judge, unscientific, unconstitutional, and unreasonable. But why did Canada have to go through 3 years of fighting these internal battles, ultimately having to take it to the court, the province had to take it to the court, before something rational could be done in a way that was good for the economy, but also good for the environment? Canada needs the 18,000 advanced chemistry people that will build our circular economy and the ability for us to recycle things tomorrow that we can't recycle today. And if we had persisted in using this unscientific language, this completely unscientific approach for the sake of scoring domestic political points on pollution being bad, we would have pushed all that science offshore where most of it currently sits, because we're not having a collaborative approach to these issues. And so I think A, go global, B, start to collaborate a bit more on where we can go, where we have a lot of shared objectives. And third, take advantage of the fact that we're just the luckiest country in the planet. We just are. We've got trade proximity to the largest economies on the planet, the United States and China, right? We have enormous resource bases that we can't even count. We haven't even mapped our mineral base. We are going to be the basis for the transition economy, minerals and rare earths, if we even could get around to mapping it. When I was in London explaining this to people, I said, you can fit Great Britain into Alberta 7 times. They fell out of their chairs. They couldn't believe it. People don't understand how big, and that's just Alberta. I mean, think of the minerals we've got out in Ontario. Think of what we can provide the world out of BC. I mean, we have so much here. We have so much opportunity. So I think the third biggest part of the fix is just figuring out the things that we've always been great at for the last 150 years: our trade, our diplomacy, the fact that we maintain a soft power. You were talking earlier at the break about the former American president saying things that are mindless. Canada's always been sort of the sensible, sort of cousin to the Americans the rest of the world can rely on to kind of talk them off the cliff sometimes. That's an incredible power. And this is the kind of thing that we should be engaging in as a nation. So to Erica, I want to say, yeah, I've thought a lot about the solutions. We can talk about specific solutions around gas, decarbonizing the Chinese and Indian electrical grid. But that's not just a climate solution, that's also a diplomatic solution. We need soft power with China and India right now, and this is a natural way to get it. We also could use the $1 trillion trade implied by the requirements to replace 20% of the Asian grid with our natural gas. So I think there are solutions. I think there's multiple solutions. But I think if we can start with going global, being collaborative, and having a sense of how we can leverage our strengths, we'll be further ahead.
We've got. Did you mention you sort of like tucked that word rivers in there to one of you're talking about Canada's mineral wealth and natural resource, and you said rivers, and I'm going woo water, and water's going to be more and more of a relevant conversation. Already is, obviously, but what sort of attitude would you take, generally speaking? I'm asking you a big, huge question here, so you can take it from whatever angle you want. But I know that some people probably feel like Alberta's water is already threatened. We could talk about across the country. There's been a lot of talk about mining in the eastern slopes of the Rockies and the implications on water basins. And I mean, you can take this from a number of different angles. Some people may take sort of more of a protectionist approach to water. Others may see huge economic opportunity and say, Alberta, Canada should leverage whatever it can. And we've got an enormous trade partner just south of us that will need Canadian water, etc. But we don't talk about this a lot. We talk a lot about oil and gas. We're talking about renewables, but we don't talk as much about water as we should.
Look, it's a great point, and it's above my pay grade. I'll tell you three things that come to mind on that. One is, as you know, I grew up down south, where we just did it. One of the first deals that we did early on was with Canada Infrastructure Bank. Great people there, and they put close to $1 billion into the irrigation strategy to make enormous new tracts of land in the southeast, and I think soon the southwest.
We should mention you're originally from Lethbridge, for people that don't know.
Yeah, best city in Alberta.
The wind capital of Canada, probably.
It is. We used to have an advantage when I was playing soccer there for the university. There's so much wind. We used to be able to score goals by kicking it. We'd sort of grown up knowing how you could kick it in ways that would curl it into the net. It's pretty intense. But I think it's a beautiful part of the world, but it's also a place where water has taken it's actually technically semi-arid desert. If you kind of look at it, the maps where they sort of do these topographical maps on climatic zones. But it's been irrigated, it's become arable, and it's part of the breadbasket that feeds Canada and the world. And I think, Ryan, the strategy around water should be part of what we're talking about with the overall environmental strategy. We've got to, again, it's just part of our wealth, and it's part of the way that we can have leverage in the world and increase our trade, as you mentioned, directly in the United States. I think there's another thing about that. I remember the coal discussions happening on with the mountains. Those are the mountains I kind of grew up playing in. And I think that there is a place, if we go down this route of being more collaborative and trying to depoliticize, there's a place for the scientists here. And one of the things that I've noticed when I was in government is we've got extraordinarily capable people in the province and federally. And when we began to do some of the work on collaborating on finding solutions, those people stepped in, and we were able to go a long, long way towards figuring out how to solve things. Most of the things we have to do are not, apparent. They're not obvious. They don't sort of submit easily to Twitter memes. That you have to work on it. And we're seeing that start to happen in some of these areas. But for the people that are listening that know what they're talking about with water, I don't want to say any more than that.
You said you want to hear from critics, so let me give you a few more. Ken's not necessarily taking a big shot at you. He says, I do find it interesting how many United Conservative Party members have come to Jesus on reducing coal use with natural gas when they would have fought tooth and nail to convert our coal power to natural gas just a few years ago. Dwayne says, to this guy, it's all about how to make a buck. And Justin says DKL is ignoring the rapid rate of renewables adoption in places like China, which outpaces our own. This is a very short-sighted thought process, it seems to me. What would you say to them?
Wow. Okay, I'll take Justin first. I'm wondering if that's our mutual friend Justin. He's just taking shots because he's got a chance to.
It's on the chat. It's Justin D. Evans.
No. I'm not. Sorry, I'm joking. Justin, it's a great question. Look, here's the problem that you find in the developing world with renewables. First thing is renewables are intermittent. Both solar and wind are intermittent, which is deadly for the grid. You can't run a hospital on intermittent power. Number one. Number two, it doesn't provide baseload power. So you have to always have, wherever you have important critical applications for energy, you also have to have a gas or coal-fired or nuclear grid attached so that when the wind and solar fails, not if, when it fails to provide the energy, you're able to provide the backup essential as critical applications. The third problem, and the one that is really the thing that defeats wind and solar in most of the developing worlds, is it takes 200 to 300 times the land mass as a single gas or nuclear or coal-fired plant. And so if you look at what's happened in China, China is actually a great example. China provides most of the world's rare earths. It provides the refining capacity of almost 80% of the world's rare earths. It is the number one provider and the dominant supply chain for solar globally. No one's even close. And yet it built 5 times the coal-fired capacity of the rest of the world combined in 2021. It has massively expanded its coal-fired plants, and it is doing a lot to decarbonize the coal-fired plants, to be fair to them. But nothing has worked as effectively at decarbonizing in the immediate term until we have really unique, not yet available battery technology or other things that could help provide some of the solutions around what's happening with renewables. Then what you're going to see is China, where they have the most renewable supply chain capability, are still massively expanding the coal-fired grid. Why are they doing that? Because renewables can't provide the security or the efficiency or the cost efficiencies of building a coal, gas, or nuclear grid. Now, in that vein, let me say that one of the areas that I'm deeply optimistic about and doing a lot of reading about right now is small modular nuclear, because I believe small modular nuclear provides a carbon zero solution. Will eventually be able to operate as an add-on to critical applications and has 40-year baseload power minimum. And some of the new technology being built in sort of the 150 to 300 megawatt categories for those small modular nuclears actually fit within the same footprint as a gas or a coal-fired plant, and I believe, and provide carbon neutral solutions. So there's lots of opportunities there, but happy to talk more about the renewables versus gas, but also just the timing of this. Right now, we're in a place where coal use is going up significantly around the planet. And the only thing that works real time immediately to decarbonize that is the retrofit of existing coal-fired facilities to gas. And that buys us time to continue to provide opportunities to apply better and better and more carbon efficient solutions.
Let me ask you this in closing. Jason Kenney, I don't know if technically he was your former boss. You were a principal advisor. Anyway, you worked alongside and closely with him. You were his closest advisor. COP26, he said he wasn't going. He described it as a political gab fest. COP27, Premier Danielle Smith had just sworn in her cabinet like a week later. She didn't go, but she sent Sonia Savage to COP27. She said that the federal environment minister, I remember she used the word hostile. She said the federal government is hostile to Alberta's industry. It's important that we send a delegation, and she did. And then COP28, which is just wrapped, Alberta sends a Canadian record for participation at a UN climate convention under Premier Smith. More than 100 people go. What would you say? You're not advising Premier Smith, are you? There's no official.
No, I have no official role with Premier Smith.
So I'll note that you're not as close to the current premier or working closely with her office. But what would you say? I'm curious to see how you will answer the question. What would you say is the biggest difference between Alberta's two most recent premiers, Kenney and Smith? How would you compare them?
Look, I think both premiers, and before them, Premier Notley, have to try and figure out. I mean, this goes to what we're talking about with Stefan. You have to try and figure out what's in the best interest of Albertans and also what Albertans' tolerances are at a particular time. And I think during a period where we were just coming out of a really tough recession, and we were pulling, as you know, Ryan, I came back to work on. I came back to give back for a few years. I left my banking job because things looked so dire, and two of my brothers were out of work. And I think that Premier Kenney at the time was constantly thinking about where and why he should be taking any trip at all when people were hurting at home. And I think we're in a different economic situation right now. I think we're on fire. We've had the most extraordinary growth. I just read I'm advising the CEO of Invest Alberta right now. I just read through our results. We've had over $32 billion in deals through Invest Alberta, 26,000 jobs. We've had the fastest population growth, the fastest economic growth, the highest net income, the highest employment rate in the country, the highest educated workforce in the country. Alberta's in great shape. And I like the fact that Premier Smith is saying what she's thinking out loud, but she's going to the places where she's not going to get a standing ovation. And it takes courage to do that. And I think that Alberta needs to represent its interests and Canada's interests in a way that's winsome and thoughtful, but also engages people on their ground. I'd like to see the Premier and our team spend the time we need to spend in Toronto. I got in trouble for taking trips to London because we had to deal with banks and insurance firms in Europe that had decided they were no longer going to fund our economy, basically, but specifically they weren't going to fund our energy and agriculture economy, based on a complete misunderstanding of what Canada was, based on a complete misapprehension of our actual ESG scores. When we showed them the math, they changed. Barclays changed. They ended up doing our bond deals. HSBC changed. The insurers took a big step back. This is important to us. And so I think any trip you take, any discussion you're going to have, you have to know why you're having it. And I'm not close enough to the internal decision-making process around Premier Smith or her team. She's got some great people around her. But I think anytime, and I believe this is true of decisions that Premier Notley made as well, just so we're taking it out of UCP territory only, I think every premier really has to wrestle with why and how they take these trips and how they make these arguments based on how Albertans feel at the time. But I remember taking the premier to the Trilateral Commission down in Mexico City, and some of the team was just horrified. They're like, just sends all the wrong messages. But, we had to make an argument at the time about who we were and what we were capable of doing in the world. And that was actually an argument that started to kick off some of the topics that we're talking about right now.
David Knight Legg, former principal advisor to Jason Kenney, now working through the Fintechs Group and as chairman of Elements Advisors. You can find him on Twitter at Knight Legg, and you can find his most recent column in the National Post. If Guilbeault actually cared about coal burning, he'd back natural gas. Thanks for hanging out with us, my man. A Merry Christmas to you. Happy holiday season.
Merry Christmas to you. I'm looking forward to coming back when it's 10 million. So probably in February, early February.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what we can do through January. Pump those numbers up. Thanks, man.
Have a great Christmas.
Yeah, you as well. That's David Knight Legg. Let us know what you think. I appreciate the comments in the chat. The best part about the chat is a lot of you think he's bang on, and a lot of you think he's out to lunch, and I kind of think that that's real life. It warms the cockles of my heart that not everybody agrees on everything. What kind of a lame talk show would that be? Charles Adler coming up in just a quick second. We'll get his response to what David just argued, and then I got a lot I want to get in with Adler. Trump has made a horrific comment about immigrants. I know that nobody should be surprised. We pulled a clip over the weekend. I sent it to Johnny on something else Trump said that has absolutely nothing to do with immigrants. I don't know if I want to say equally as shocking. It's like trying to compare. Anyway, and you look at the polling, and in as many ways as we say the former president of the United States, you might as well say the future one as well. Now, there's a lot that still has to happen, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm always curious to know where you land on that. But I just have this kind of a sick feeling in my gut. Do you? I don't know. And then there's the story of Jaskirat Singh Sidhu as well, the trucker that caused that crash near Tisdale, Saskatchewan, that claimed, obviously, 16 precious lives. The horrific Humboldt Broncos bus crash. Canada Border Services Agency says he should be deported. And I know that this is a conversation that is difficult for Canadians, maybe more difficult to publicly state that you believe that on compassionate grounds, Mr. Singh Sidhu should be allowed to stay. I don't know. It's a supercharged conversation for sure. It's an emotional one for sure. And those are the ones where I look to Chuck and his Canadian common sense to help us sort that out. We'll be looking to the live chat on that one as well. This podcast is happening with the support of Friesen Brothers. And, of course, as we know, many of you are going to be hosting family and friends over the holiday season, maybe for dinner. Lucky you. Your house will be full. Your heart will be full. But what's your plan? The Ukrainian-inspired Christmas dinner box from Catering by Friesen Brothers to the rescue. Available to order right now. This is a chef-prepared Christmas catering box. It can feed up to 4 people, so if you have 40 coming, you just buy 10 of them. It's simple. It includes traditional Christmas treats, roasted turkey, cranberry sauce, gravy, tray buns, pierogies, bacon bits, green onion, sour cream, carrots, and creamy dill sauce, which, Johnny, is the most underrated Friesen Brothers side, I would say. There's also optional add-ons like Ukrainian fried sausage, their handcrafted pies, Granny's famous stuffing. You can order online at cateringbyfriesen.com/Christmas dinner box, or just pop into one of their 16 locations across the province. We're going to be talking a lot as 2024 is upon us about fresh starts, about new opportunities. If that's right up your alley, if that's where your head is at, before you put a game plan in place, consider all your options. The best one may very well be Athabasca University. You can find it online at athabascau.ca, Canada's open university. Scroll down their main page to learn a little bit more about how your options open up with the online offerings at AU. You know, they have more than 50,000 alumni, 50,000 program and course alumni from over 100 countries. It's unbelievable. Many factors make AU unique. You can read about the AU advantage at athabascau.ca. Dwayne in the chat says Ralph Klein shouldn't have privatized driver training in Alberta. A comment, I'm sure, in the context of our conversation about the Humboldt driver. Charles Adler joins us the first episode of every week. The Emmy Award-winning talk radio legend and host of the Charles Adler Show podcast. It's nice to see you again. Happy Monday. Hope you had a great weekend.
I did. Loved your guest. Oh, my God.
Smart guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mind if I borrow them from time to time and
fill your boots, man.
Okay.
I remember the first time.
Really,
and can I say,
really,
let me take you behind the curtain for a second, because you and I,
Sure.
this is more relevant to you than any other of the 35 million people in Canada. You and I both had dust-ups with Alberta's former premier.
Absolutely.
Alberta's former premier and his staff, quite frankly, ensured that I got fired from my radio job. So it's very relevant to me. And David Knight Legg was the first out of the Kenney administration. We don't really use that language in Canada, but out of Kenney's office, really. He was the first to do an interview with me on Real Talk, and I've always appreciated that. He kind of stepped outside of the ban, because I've heard directly from horses' mouths, ministers were banned from doing interviews with me, including on Real Talk. David Knight Legg said, basically, fuck that, I'm doing it, and I've always appreciated him for that.
Well, after my dust up, as you call it, with Kenney, all the name brand, big brand conservatives, including Polyev, were basically not allowed to be on my show.
Yeah, he wields a big stick. So, anyway, there you have it. We move on. Yeah. Life moves on. Here we are. I got a lot I want to talk to you about, but I wanted to just, since we just had a half-hour conversation, interesting, sure had the audience thinking, sure had me thinking, on Canada's emissions reduction strategy, but more specifically a global reduction strategy. And Canada dropping the ball. Any thoughts to add?
Well, the math, the logic is inarguable. Alberta has this massive resource. Obviously, nobody in Alberta needs to know what it is. But the idea that we can help decarbonize so much of the world that is dependent on coal, including China, with our gas, the fact that we're not encouraged to generate more of it, mine for more of it, drill for more of it, and export it to the rest of the world to help with mitigating the impacts of climate change. I mean, it's so utterly logical. I just don't understand why what your guest was talking about isn't right in the vanguard of thinking. And not that I'm a supporter of Polyev, but that's got nothing to do with it. Frankly, if Polyev was making the case that your guest was making on a daily basis, saying, vote for me, vote for a conservative government, this is my plan to help the world. This is my plan to mitigate climate change. This is my plan to make Canada a champion of fighting climate change. And this is the way we're going to do it with this incredible resource we have called Alberta. That would impress the hell out of me so much more than, I don't even want to get into all the sort of immature, junior high, jerky nonsense that he does, wasting my thinking time.
Yeah, I didn't know, like, if my question to David was a little clumsy when I was like, well, what did you expect Guilbeault to say? Like, did you really expect Guilbeault to go over to COP, to go over to Dubai and champion Canadian natural gas? But I know a lot of people working in the energy sector would go, yeah, that is literally exactly what we expect him to do as a federal minister, responsible for Canadian well-being.
We want to help the world.
Yeah, I guess
we're a superpower. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. You make the argument. You make the argument that transitioning from coal to natural gas does help the environment, and Canada can benefit along the way. Like it's very simple, very cut and dried. But I just think that the point I was making in asking the question is that certain people, from certain ideologies or with a certain approach to combating climate change, like Guilbeault does, and he does so in earnest. Like, to his credit, he's always available to Real Talk. His team reaches out; they want to make him available all the time. He wants to be on more than he's on. He wants to get the country talking about it, right. and I just think, like, he is, like, and I don't speak on his behalf for sure, but, like, inherently, like he is ideologically unable, I think, to champion natural gas internationally. I don't know, and like, obviously it doesn't benefit the energy sector, but I just don't think he's capable of doing it.
Climate change doesn't know borders, and you got into some of that with the guest, and the idea that we turned it into a sort of some kind of competitive sport where we want to have on a percentage basis, we want to have less of a percentage of emissions than others. I mean, that's just nonsense. I mean, we're an energy superpower. That's what we are. We don't treat ourselves that way. We're an energy superpower, and as an energy superpower, we have an opportunity to help bring prosperity and mitigate climate change at the same time to the rest of the world. And I'm sorry if some people who think of themselves as progressives think that what I'm saying here is anti-progressive and I'm a lobbyist for oil and gas. I'm none of those things. This is logic. I mean, when your guest said that nobody has been able to debunk what he's saying, it's true. You can't debunk it because it's the God's honest truth.
Appreciate Elias in the chat says, I can't remember her name, but one of Jespo's former guests suggested that natural gas wasn't as clean as promised, and in some cases the numbers were even worse than coal. Is it truly beneficial as a bridge? That from Elias. Elias is remembering Jenny Yeremy, who joined me on the show on November 2nd. If you want to go back in our archives, it was an excellent episode on natural resources. We talked about natural gas. We talked a lot about drought and water shortages. That was November 2nd. You can find it on YouTube or wherever you get our podcast archives. Hey, let me ask you this. This is something, I know that this is a tough subject. The Humboldt Broncos crash resonated with every Canadian for obvious reasons. It prompted the largest crowd-funded donation in history. I mean, the tens of millions of dollars that Canadians donated, I think, was indicative of the way that most people felt, which was just they could picture their own kid on the bus. They could picture themselves on the bus. It was just like a horrific tragedy for obvious reasons. Now, years later, we find ourselves in a situation where the driver responsible for that crash, Jaskirat Singh Sidhu, who is a permanent resident to Canada, recently married, pleaded guilty to all charges, did not appeal his sentence, did his time, was paroled, and now the Canada Border Services Agency says that he should be deported last week, losing a court battle. It's not a complete lost cause. He could stay in Canada on, quote, compassionate grounds, but it's prompted a debate on how Canadians feel about whether or not he should be able to stay here or be deported back to India. Where do you stand?
It's not difficult for me at all. You break the law and you kill our people. I want you to the hell out of here. And if there was a way to have him deported sooner and have him serve his sentence in India, I would have been totally fine with that.
Yeah, I don't agree with you. And if he was impaired during the crash, maybe it would have been different. If there was malice, I would feel different. If it was a shooting spree, if he stabbed people, and people are saying in our chat, I think it was Seventh Pilot, someone said, if you run a stop sign, it's not an accident. I know people don't like the word accident. Let's call it a crash. He caused the crash. He's told the courts he was distracted by a flapping tarp. But I just don't. I feel like he did his time. Nothing is going to bring the boys back. I want to say that I'm not going to name the families, but I'm personal friends with two of the fathers who lost boys in that crash. I know for sure one of them wants him gone. I haven't talked to the other about I've not shared my perspective with them personally because I'm staying in my lane on that one. But I don't know. It doesn't seem like the right move. He didn't go out and intentionally murder people. I think that deportation, I don't know. It just doesn't seem like it fits.
It's not an accident. It is a crash. He blew a stop sign. He was obviously driving a cargo that had the opportunity to kill people, which is exactly what happened. And I'm not as fortunate as you to have an unlimited amount of compassion in this situation. That's not me taking a shot at you. I'm here to say that you're probably a better human being than I am. I'm a flawed human being, and all my compassion goes to those kids and their parents and their sisters and their brothers and their families.
And you're obviously more than welcome to feel the way you did. I said yesterday when you and I were texting, getting ready for this, I said, I don't want to know your answer to this question until we do the show. I want to find out on the show. I feel like, and I'm not stacking up, like I hesitate to even use the word tragedy. The loss of these lives is a tragedy. I feel like you heap tragedy. It's not the same, but I feel like you heap tragedy on tragedy by forcing this guy to go back to a country he left to start a new life in Canada, and I feel like he couldn't.
Brian, if it were a different situation, if it were a situation where he's oppressed in that country, if it's a situation like say a gay man in Iran or Uganda has come here, I'd feel totally differently. I don't send people back to countries that are going to persecute them and torture them and kill them. But that's not how I see India.
Hey, were you paying attention to this story, by the way? A deportation order canceled for a gay man from Edmonton who said that he feared returning to Uganda. I thought that was an interesting story. I mean, it does happen. I knew that our good friend, Liberal MP in the Edmonton Randy
area,
Boissonnault was on that one.
I just knew that he would take care of business, and if I didn't think he would take care of business, I would have done much more with it myself on both the podcast and my column. It's outrageous that this country would send a gay man to Uganda. Can't handle that.
Yeah, so I'm going to do. I'll put an unofficial, unscientific Twitter poll out there, and I'll do it right now as we're talking. I'm curious to see where people will land on this. I mean, I'll keep the question simple. I mean, should he be deported or not? I want to say, I feel like just because there are personal connections here, I want to be really clear. I know that this is like for people that lost sons or a daughter in that crash. I feel like our justice system doesn't work that gives some people more influence in a decision. But I understand that none of us have walked miles in the shoes they've walked in. And
Ryan,
there's no way to relate. But this is
Ryan,
a story that I think the whole country takes an interest in.
Right, but I don't mean to trespass and make this personal.
Say whatever you want.
I don't know how to do real talk without being personal.
Do
I
it.
think that you have got, and when I said earlier, I wasn't, and I don't want anyone to take this the wrong way. It wasn't snark. It wasn't passive aggressive. It was the truth. I think that in some ways you're a better human being than me. And one of the reasons I believe that is I think that you can be more forgiving. And pardon me, once again, I don't mean to trespass, but I think part of it is your Christian training. And I think you take the idea of redemption more seriously than I do. And I believe that you think that this person is redeeming himself under the Canadian justice system. He never tried to do bafflegab on what happened. He pled guilty. He didn't fight it. He confessed. He did contrition, and he's done contrition under the legal system as well. So he did both moral contrition and legal contrition. And as far as you're concerned, please, if I'm speaking for you, stop me. But I think that you are speaking from the heart, and you are speaking from your soul, and you're speaking from your core beliefs and your core values. And I'm not quite on your level when it comes to some of that, especially on redemption. I wish I were, but you asked me to give you my honest, from the heart and soul and gut opinion, and it has not changed since the moment that crash happened. From the moment that crash happened, I said to myself that whoever did this has got to go to prison for a long time. And when it was clear that whoever did this, the person who did this, is not a Canadian, I'm sorry. That's how I felt at that time, and I've gone over this for many hours in my mind, and I have not been able to come over to your side. Now maybe someday I will, but not this day.
It's fair. My Twitter poll is up for people that want to check it out. I kept the question simple: yes, deport him, or no, let him stay. I don't know. I mean, how about this from Ben in the chat? I want this to go noted. He says, Christian training indeed, set in a positive light for once. That from Ben, which is fair. I don't give everybody a pass, and in some areas I don't have any faith in redemption. There was a story, I don't know if you paid attention, a perennial threat, a horrific human being, a person that goes by the name of Laverne Waskahat. I don't know if you saw this. Edmonton police had warned that this person was to be released, and said that there is a high likelihood that they will reoffend, in particular sexual offenses targeting children. I don't know if you saw this, Charles, but
I did.
This person wasn't out for any longer than 2 days before they were rearrested by police, discovered to have a baby crib, diapers, dozens of alleged pornographic drawings, and a laptop. So I don't want to take the class out of this conversation, but like individuals like that, I'm happy to lock them up forever and have them rot in prison. I think that if, as a society, we're not protecting our children and protecting our most vulnerable, then what are we even doing? So I don't give a pass to everybody, but in this circumstance with Mr. Singh Sidhu, you and I see it differently. That's perfectly fine. Let's talk.
Yeah, I mean, on situations like that, I think I may have mentioned this a time or two, when people, civil liberties people, tell me, so you want to warehouse these pedophiles? Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
I do. I do want to warehouse them. If it's obvious that a person cannot control their impulses, they stay in the box until there's proof that they can control them. And when the police, and I do trust the police on this, they know this guy. When police tell us that they have a high level of certainty that he's going to do it again, I'm asking myself, what kind of a crazy system do we live in where police have to do this? Why can't we just keep him in the box?
Yeah.
And I realize, once again, the civil liberties people are opposed.
Yeah, but no, I'm different on stuff like if you were whatever. There's any number of offenses that I believe that people can be rehabilitated, and I believe that prison time and counseling and other resources, detox, like all the things can get people back on track. And I love a good comeback story. I love a good redemption story. I believe in second chances, but like not with that. And I just think we're so soft.
Well, yeah, but I'm positive that if the truck driver, in this case, who's being deported to India, I think if the truck driver had not shown contrition, if he had behaved differently, and if you felt that he was going to be allowed to get back in a truck again and possibly do what was done before and possibly drive recklessly, et cetera, I think that your attitude would be different. But I just,
Well, of
I
course
just
it
think
would.
at the moment, the truck driver and the pedophile are apples and oranges.
Apples and oranges. And I'm not trying to conflate the two. I'm just saying that I'm not wired in a way that second chances for everybody. I want to give a recent example of somewhere where I'm like about as if you want to, I think it's lazy to try to all the time to try to put crime and punishment or justice stories on the political spectrum. But if you want to know where I'm furthest right, is with pedophiles and sex offenders. Like that's where I just have zero appetite for this. I've been in arguments with friends. I have a dear personal friend who works as a counselor with the federal corrections system with pedophiles, and she and I, we've not. It's not been a yelling match, but it's been like a very and she's right. I have no experience in this field. I'm not a trained professional like she is. She's right that if I heard the stuff that she hears, I would lose all faith in humanity. But she works hard to try to help these people get on the right track, and I just don't have faith that they can. So I'm not trying to drag pedophiles into a conversation with the Humboldt driver. But I do think it's important to know, and you are right. Like if Mr. Singh Sidhu was drunk or high when he was driving that truck, if he was going if there were a number of contributing factors, I might feel differently on this. But I don't know. I mean, interesting comment from Alberta girl who says we all know that if that driver was Canadian, he'd be back truck driving. Ken says he is guilty, but it's not like he's a terrorist. He should stay. Lorne quite rightfully asks, what about the owner of the trucking company? Wasn't there some controversy on their part? There certainly was. So I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I understand that not everybody's going to feel the same on this. Maybe we'll take a quick look here, Charles. The unofficial, unscientific Twitter poll has been up for just a few minutes. 125 votes already. Wow, 87% of people say let him stay. So 13% of people early. It's only been up for 4 minutes, but 13% say deport him. 87% say let him stay. So it is what he is. Let's talk about Trump. Unbelievable comment. I mean, I guess, you're kind of like in territory where nothing should surprise us anymore. But the former and potentially future president of the United States over the weekend says that immigrants are, quote, poisoning the blood of our country. The current president of the United States, Joe Biden, says, or the campaign anyway, says the comments are Hitler-esque. I don't even know what the question is, man, but it's pretty shocking to hear somebody in a position like this. And he doubled down on it, by the way, after he made the comments audibly. He went onto his social media platform, Truth Social, and typed out the exact same thing. You want to talk about turning up the temperature in a country, in a world that's already very tense right now. This is how you do it.
He knows that on the border situation, and the Democrats also know they've got a very tough situation there. Most of the so-called independents, and just to do the politics on this, and I can't help but do the politics because we're talking about a person who has got a good chance of being president again, and so it is about politics. And roughly a third of the population in the states is Republican, roughly a third is Democrat, roughly a third is independent. Doesn't matter which election we're talking about. Whichever presidential candidate can get the majority of the independents, that's the one who wins. And Trump knows that the heavy majority of independents are for either sealing off that border or doing whatever it takes to keep the many migrants who are coming in every single day out of there. And Trump knows that by doubling down and tripling down on this kind of talk, it's successful for him. How do I personally feel about it? I don't even have to tell anyone how I personally feel about someone using, quote, Hitler-esque language. But I can easily, intellectually separate my feelings about Hitler.
And it's a brand new thing, and I think it's so important. I'm going to indemnify through the federal government all police officers and law enforcement officials throughout the United States from being destroyed by the radical left for taking strong actions against crime.
I don't know, man. This just feel like
that's right about that's aimed right at the Floyd story. So
yeah.
Make no mistake about it. He's saying that the Chauvin who was convicted of murdering George Floyd in Minneapolis, Trump would do whatever it takes to pardon him and release him. And this is the stuff. Once again, Ryan, I'm not proud to say this, but I don't want to be impervious to political reality. This stuff works. There's nothing the Democrats can do. They can get self-righteous. They can get sanctimonious. They can talk about how America is better than this. And I do believe that America can be better than this. But if we're focused on this the way we are, hardcore in a hockey game, we understand that this enforcer is what people are looking for right now, and they're looking for enforcement.
It feels to me like this is it just feels like he's just sort of like setting the table for another January 6th. You know, it just feels
of course he is. But in terms of next election, he's basically saying to, once again, those independents, because the Republicans are in his camp. There's no question about that. He is saying to the independents, let me turn this
You
down.
owe us a beer for that. Johnny, what beer do you want Charles to send us for having his ringer on?
24.
24. Oh, wow.
Miller High Life.
24 Miller High Life, Adler.
There's a reason I had it on. Because it was a different call. It was a different thing that I'm actually getting. This sounds crazy, but because I'm talking Alberta right now, I'm expecting a package from Alberta. Okay?
You could have just said Alberta is calling, and we would have awarded you 10 points.
This was BC calling, so that's why I feel guilty. But I'm expecting a package from Alberta. And if I don't have the ringer on, I don't get the package.
Don't let one of Canada's most downloaded talk shows get in the way of you taking calls for your Christmas packages arriving, Adler. That's fine. No. We would hate to inconvenience the delivery of your Christmas packages. Maybe your Hanukkah package. I should at least I should come correct. Happy Hanukkah.
Christmas. It's Christmas. We can play the Hanukkah card as long as we want. For 99% of my life, I've been supporting Christmas, and I have gone to. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I live in the Christian world, and if someone gets offended by that, I'm sorry.
No.
Here's the thing about Trump and the Democrats and the Republicans. Trump is doing all of this not just because Trump is Trump. You know, we can talk about Trump forever, alleged criminal, and the moral issues and all of that. We can talk about that. I want to stay on the politics. He is doing this because he wants to make absolutely sure that nobody who's running for the Republicans and nobody who's running for the Democrats and no other independents can possibly take his real estate. He owns that piece of real estate. Nobody's going to move him off. And in a world where it's all binary, okay? It's all black and white. It's all either or. So for people who are worried about the borders, for people who are worried about that particular situation, where people who are worried about activists getting away with things, I'll just put it that way. I'm talking specifically about Black Lives Matter. For people who don't like those groups, Trump is saying, I'm here, not only am I your guy, I'm enthusiastically your guy. I'll enthusiastically give the finger to all the people you don't like, and nobody is going to ever give you as much of that as you want with the enthusiasm, with the passion that I have, meaning those voters end up identifying with them. And when you identify with someone, you end up forgiving them all of the various trespasses that you may not like, because you basically say, yeah, Ralph, Donald, Trump, whoever you're, I'm not really happy that he's done this and this, but he's my guy.
100%. You can catch Charles Adler's podcast whenever you want, wherever you get your podcasts, and you can catch him right here, the first episode of every week, except for next week, because we're going to be celebrating Christmas with our families. We shall see you the first episode the week after, pal.
Every Monday that we're together, and sometimes it's Tuesdays, but every time we're together, it's a great Christmas gift to me. Thank you very much for everything you do.
We love you, Chuck. We'll talk to you again soon. Happy New Year to you. Charles Adler. Can I put you on the spot and ask if you have a thought on the deportation of Jaskirat Singh Sidhu? Do you have I know it's like maybe something that not everybody even wants to talk publicly about.
Well, I don't, but now you've put me there.
I have put you on the spot. Do you have a thought on it?
I'll say, first of all, I have no idea what it's like to, first of all, have a child, but I can only imagine what it's like to not only have a child, but several of their friends. This was a horrific accident.
This is as bad as it is. The worst.
It's horrible. I have no idea. And it doesn't matter if the kids were white or black or who they were and what religion they were. This was one of the most horrible events I've ever been alive and seen in this country. So, the families, the grieving, all of that, it's horrific. But at the same time, you're talking about a 29-year-old man with a wife who came here, who, isn't a criminal, doesn't seem to be negligent. I mean, we go through,
Well, definitely negligent.
Well,
but-
sorry, before that, sorry. He had little training. He was only trained for like a year.
Shouldn't have been
this
driving.
truck for like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
A trucking industry in Canada that is pretty. It's a lot of people say is failing,
There
rotting
have
away.
been some changes, but you're right. It was a mess. Probably
not
still
great.
is.
What I would say is that Charles said a lot of ifs. If this happened, if he was gay, if this other thing,
Yeah.
I think we just stick to what we know, and that's that. He was driving too fast. He didn't apply brakes. He went through a stop sign. He committed an act that killed a lot of people. He should be punished. But I don't know what this double punishment, how it serves anyone.
You mean like he pleaded guilty, he did his time, and now he's
obviously
being deported.
remorseful.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see what I don't see what keeping him here, how that, other than emotionally and being a reminder to the families, how it hurts anyone else. So if I had to go just from a legal standpoint, totally emotionless, I don't think there's a reason to deport him, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah. And personal friends of mine, two of them, I've sat in one of their office and seen the framed photo of his son's Humboldt Broncos jersey hanging on the wall. And it just, it's like, I feel like I'm going to cry thinking about it right now. I can't understand the loss. The other, obviously everybody knows I'm friends with Chris Joseph, former Edmonton Oiler, Edmonton firefighter, just a wonderful salt of the earth guy, an amazing family. He will miss his boy Jackson for the rest of time. And Chris has been very open in talking about how he feels. And and I know Chris is a guy with a big heart, and I know that he's a loving guy, and he's sincere, but he wants Mr. Sidhu deported. Like he says, we don't want to run into him. We don't want to see him. We just want to know he's not in Canada. And what am I going to say? Yeah, but no, I'm not going to have that conversation with a father or a mother or a brother or a sister that lost a loved one. But I just think this is the show where we have these conversations, and I just don't feel. And again, I have the luxury of being separated from this story. In other words, I didn't lose my son. Heaven forbid, I would be crushed. But it doesn't feel like the right move. I didn't expect, I didn't know where Adler was going to go on that, but there was no wavering. He was black and white on that one, which that's fine. I mean,
yeah, it's his opinion, and I
100%.
I hesitate to have one because,
100%.
but I do think,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying it's the reason, but I feel like if his last name was Smith, or if he was from Russia,
if
or
he was
something
white,
else,
or if he was from
that
Saskatchewan,
we wouldn't be talking about deporting so much. But as soon as you have a brown man from a brown country, immediately those things come to light. But I also think, and I'll just say this, that 8 years isn't really enough for the loss of that many people. But then, getting into things I probably don't have a lot of expertise in with the legal field. But
but
it's
set
that
a
many
precedent,
lives
though.
lost when I hear 8 years, it doesn't equate. It doesn't make sense to me. That seems a little light.
In other words,
But
you feel like it should be 8 years for every soul that was lost.
I don't know about 8. Then that's your life in jail for something that, I mean, we were talking about manslaughter, a couple weeks ago. He didn't set out that day to crash, ruin his life, and kill a bunch of people, but he definitely did. And I feel like 8 years isn't enough, but I don't know what the correct amount of years would be. I know
That's fair.
The most he could have got is what in Canada you're
Well,
going to get 25, right?
This set a precedent. This was the heaviest sentence ever. It is the heaviest sentence ever handed down in Canada for
so
dangerous
what more
driving
could they have
offense.
done, right?
But you're right. I mean, I feel like, and again, who are we? We're not judges. We're not lawyers.
Not at all.
Take it for what it's worth. But I feel like, it feels like it should be a 20-year sentence just based on the magnitude of what happened. But also, again, there's legal experts that could explain to us, I'm sure, why it's 8.
And I don't think this guy's going to be living any sort of nice life here in Canada after this. This is a guy who's going to go to sleep, wake up every day. This is going to haunt him for the rest of his life. And I'm hoping, if he doesn't get deported, that maybe he does something with his life to help other people to try. I mean, if I did something like this, God forbid, if I made an accident that affected people this way, I would spend every waking moment of my life trying to make up for it in some way every day. And I hope he does the same. But the other thing is, like, there's truck drivers driving on less sleep than this guy was, who could make the same mistakes, who have gotten into accidents that weren't as bad. I mean, I just feel like I just feel I feel like if he had a different last name, we wouldn't be talking about this that much.
I appreciate you being honest about how you feel about it.
And I was one of those
putting you on the
people.
spot.
I put a hockey stick outside the door for 2 weeks when this
100%.
happened. I couldn't
You
sleep
and
for the
I-
first night. I was like, how could you go on with your life?
The
after
crash
this,
was on
right?
a Friday, and you and I both worked the Oilers game on the Saturday.
Yeah,
I was
it
the
was a
in-game
tough
host.
one.
You were the DJ. It was a very difficult game to work. I remember these are just little things. I mean, I just remember I went out and bought a new shirt. I needed a green shirt. I wanted it to be the shade of the Broncos jersey. We had the yellow ribbons on. I remember being like, how am I, even my job, this is, I don't know if I'm going down memory lane here in a weird way, but my job there is to get the fans fired up, and it's hockey night in Canada, and here we go. But the whole nation is in shock. I was surprised that the game was played. I was surprised that the National Hockey League didn't pause its schedule, but it didn't. And I remember being in Rogers Place that night, and just the vibe in there. It was 18,000 people.
It's unusually
just
quiet. Yeah.
Unusually quiet. And but also I think coming together to watch hockey in a way that sort of said something as well. Like it was a community of hockey fans that were mourning a tragedy that fell upon an entire organization in a country. And I don't blame people for feeling strongly on it. I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer. I know what I feel.
I don't think
there
anyone's
is.
right here. Like, I don't think it's
Yeah.
ever. I don't think whatever happens, anyone's ever going to be happy, ever going to be content, ever going to be whole again.
Yeah.
Him, the families, everyone.
No, I mean,
it's-
I'm surprised. I don't even want to say it. But
Say it.
Well, I think that if you caused an accident like that, the biggest thing is that you wouldn't want to wake up anymore.
No,
I mean, that's the thing. I think
100%.
if I were to cause a crash like that, I think that, and I don't even know if this is an irresponsible comment, but it's real talk. I'll give you that. Would be to not die by suicide. Like, quite frankly, that would be my biggest challenge, is to stay alive and try to remind myself that I have a wife and a child, and you know what I mean? Unofficial, unscientific Twitter poll. It's been up now for 20 minutes, 327 votes, 84% say let him stay. So, we'll report back on this tomorrow. We'll see where it goes. I mean, the trend seems to be that overwhelmingly people that are responding to this believe that he should have a chance to stay in Canada. If you'd rather write us an email, get
Expand.
into a little bit more thought on how you reach your decision or how this is impacting you. Maybe we'll hear from somebody that has been at fault in an accident where there was a fatality. I don't know. Or maybe someone who's lost someone.
Tara Lynn's comment here is perfect. The
What'd
only
she
right
say?
answer is to review and overhaul the industry. Totally. Like, I don't think this guy should have been. I don't know. How long do you have to train before you operate a vehicle like that? You know what I mean? And just for me, being on the road 2 weeks said a lot. If he'd been driving for 5 years, I might feel a little differently. But when you go through some shoddy training for a year and then you're on the road 2 weeks, I don't know. I feel for him, but I also obviously feel for every single family member who's still alive dealing with this every day. They wake up in a nightmare. So does
Every
he,
single
right?
day.
Yeah.
Every single day. It would never get any less painful, ever. It doesn't matter, because you lose your son or your daughter. Dana Bronze was on that bus as well. You lose them at 17 years old, 18 years old, and then you're going to miss them on what would have been their 21st birthday. You're going to wonder if they would have got married. You're going to wonder if they would have had kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
You're going to wonder if you would have had grandkids. It doesn't matter if you live until 85, 90 years old, you're still going to miss your child every single day. We have personal friends that lost their little boy, 14 years of age, in a ski accident. And every single day they wonder who he would have grown up to be. So but I also believe that, I understand that sentencing is important. It's very important. Families want to see guilty pleas or convictions. Guilty pleas go further. Convictions, it's tough for families and survivors that are dragged through trials. Trials are very difficult. A guilty plea maybe eases a tiny little bit of pain off the family. And then, I think that if something happens, to a family member or a loved one, you want to know that this person that perpetrated that is paying their debt to society. But it doesn't take the pain away. It never will. right? I mean, I think we talk a little bit about capital punishment. We talk about the death penalty in the United States, and like, does it ease the pain of families to see their daughter's murderer get the electric chair? Maybe a little bit.
I don't know. For me, if someone does, and we're talking about rapists, murderers, child molesters, I feel like them living out their lives in a cell is to me, if it happened to me, again, I don't have kids, but would be more of a punishment, knowing that they're sitting in solitude. They're never going to be outside in the real is better than, the 5 seconds of watching them pass away.
Is Adler still on the call?
He's right here.
Okay, bring him back in. Adler just sent me a text and said, please let me back in. As we're debriefing here, if you're just joining us. Chuck, what did you want to say? Welcome back. Oh, hang on. We got to get your audio sorted out here. I think you're muted right now.
He's got himself muted.
Okay,
mute.
Okay, there you go. I can hear
good?
you.
Okay, all right. Look, I don't want to get into a confrontation with you or Johnny about this. It's obviously highly emotional. I rarely see you guys debrief for as long, and I understand the reasons for it. But I need to take something off the table here. My old man was highly aware that I was born in a different country. And he told me that he expected me to live up to the highest standards of a Canadian and possibly even higher. He said that if I ever hurt anybody in this wonderful country that allowed us to have freedom, that he would want this country to send me back to where I came from. That was a very strong message from my old man that I heard over and over again. I'm not saying he was right. I'm not saying he was wrong, but that's how I was brought up. And so when I learned that the driver was from a different country, I reverted to exactly the same position. And I'm not saying that I'm right or wrong. I'm saying that was my core position at that moment. It never changed. And Johnny implied, I think, and if I'm wrong, Johnny, please forgive me, but I think you implied that my position is based on the color of the man's skin.
Oh no,
he's not saying
not you.
But I think that I think absolutely 100%, Chuck. Some public opinion is influenced by Mr. Singh Sidhu's background, without a doubt.
I'm not saying you're wrong about that at all. But when John said, he was from Ukraine or whatever, I'm 100% in support of Ukraine. I'm from the country next door. They're my neighbors, and they're also my neighbors in Manitoba, Alberta, everywhere I've lived. I feel very close to Ukrainians. But if it were a Ukrainian driver, I would feel exactly the same way. So I just wanted to make it clear, because I thought if it was foggy for me, then maybe it was foggy for some listeners to this podcast and some viewers as well. And I just wanted to clear up the
100%,
any possible cloud.
100%. I appreciate you popping back in, pal.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You bet. And I will say,
feel like we have drunk drivers and other things from people who are immigrants. And I don't ever hear, we don't hear screaming. I'm sure there is screams, but not as much. This was the first thing people started screaming when this happened, right? So I just felt that way, and I just felt maybe if it was like a white guy from the UK or whatever, we might hear it a little less. But again, I don't think there's any right answer to this. I think everyone's valid in feeling hurt and having whatever opinion they have which way. But I mean, I think we can see from our poll that a lot of people feel the opposites.
I think it's a fair conclusion that you've reached, and I appreciate just an opportunity with you and Charles and the people in the live chat as well. Like Graham is in the live chat right now, said this is a top 3 episode for him. I don't know if I'm going to say top 3, but I feel the same way. I feel like we're having really good conversation.
It's
today.
hard to weigh in.
This show is designed. We can just like meander in our conversation and explore feelings and sort of like try to hash things out and say what we think and acknowledge that not everyone will agree, and that's good. The kids these days would call this a safe space, where we want this to be a place where we can talk, we can spill our guts basically and on stuff that matters, and this conversation is one that matters. I mean, this tragedy impacted this country in a way that very few tragedies do. And for that reason, I'm grateful that we can talk about it. And we're doing it with the support of partners of ours, like our friends at Complete Care Restoration. And I want to tell you about them for a quick second. If this is the first time you're listening to Real Talk in a while, or if you haven't yet heard this, I had a chance to sit down with Kelly, who's the founder, one of the owners at Complete Care Restoration. Unbelievable stuff going on there. Complete Care Restoration, they are a BMO certified disaster restoration company. Very few across the country can make this claim, and they're the first in Canada to be recycling as much material as humanly possible from the flood sites that they're helping out at, from the burnt out homes and businesses that they're rebuilding. More than 70% of the materials that they're taking out of those sites are going to recycling facilities as opposed to landfills. It is an unbelievable improvement in an industry where, for the most part, everything is going into garbage bins. Like, everything is going to the landfill, but not with Complete Care Restoration. It's something they're very proud of, as they should be, and it makes us even more proud to have them on our sponsors roster if disaster strikes. I mean, they say they hope you never call them. But if disaster does strike, you can find them online at completecarerestoration.ca. And one more recommendation before we get to Positive Reflections. We have such a great story for Positive Reflections today. Fresh Nets, you may have heard of it. I want to help out those of you that are searching for the perfect gift for your husband, your wife, maybe it's your parents, somebody that has an outdoor space that has so much potential but desperately needs to be brought to life. You want to put something under the Christmas tree that'll absolutely wow them? Why not book a consultation with Mike and his team at Eden Landscaping? How cool of a Christmas gift would it be to put in a water feature, or maybe make that dream of an outdoor kitchen finally happen? They do full project management, which means you're not subcontracting out anything. You're not dealing with any of the headaches and hassles that come with big undertakings like these. From start to finish, Eden Landscaping has it all under control. You can book your consult today at landscapeedmonton.ca. Got this email from Steph, by the way. Absolutely loved this. She wrote it to us on Friday afternoon. You and I were in here wrapping up our duties, and this dropped in the inbox just out of nowhere. Steph, who's a real talker out in beautiful Nelson, BC. Have you ever been to Nelson?
I love Nelson
dude.
so much.
Nelson is such a cool town.
My two favorite places in BC, Nelson and Fernie.
Really?
Yeah.
Fernie.
Fernie's incredible.
I feel-
It changed a lot, but back in the early 2000s, Fernie was a paradise.
Man, and if you're a mountain rider, if you're a skier or a snowboarder, Fernie's snow is some of the
Incredible.
best in North America. So a shout out to Steph in Nelson, BC. I just wanted to read this. She wrote it just to us, but I wanted to share it as we are in the holiday season. Just said, I want to thank you for the amazing content that you bring in Real Talkers. She says, I'm often too busy to be in the chat and truly engaging, but rest assured I'm listening every day at some point. Steph, we sure appreciate that. She says, for 3 years, you've delivered consistent, current, great content. You've engaged the Real Talk audience, brought light to meaningful discussions in a time of media crisis. She says, I'm often nodding and saying, yes, exactly. And other times I'm screaming, what the fuck? But isn't that the beauty of it? She says, and it sure is, Steph. She says, please let Supriya know that she's been on this Real Talker's mind and heart since her husband's diagnosis and his passing, and I hope one day to hear her on air again. What a terrible tragedy for a young family. Steph says, season's greetings, good health and happiness to all of you and your families today and every day. You make our world a better place, and that is worth supporting. That from Steph. Wanted to let you know how much that meant to us.
Beautiful.
That was really amazing. And of course, our hearts are with Supriya, and I will pass that along. Thinking of them this holiday season, obviously going to be a very difficult one. Our friends at Kuby Renewable Energy, every Monday, give us a chance to take the heavy stuff and just for a second, press pause on it to take the negativity out of the news cycle, harness some positive energy, right? And we call it Positive Reflections. We absolutely love this, and we got a submission. We've asked you to send us your positive reflections, and that's exactly what Real Talker Reed did. Reed is the founder of Fresh Nets, which is one of the coolest initiatives that we've seen in a really long time. You can check him out online at freshnets.ca. He says, I would love to see this featured on Positive Reflections. Well, Reed, here you go. He says, the Fresh Nets initiative is beautiful in its simplicity. He said, we have to ensure that every public outdoor basketball hoop has a fresh net. Most kids learn to play the game on the city, school, or community courts near these homes, and if they don't have nets, there's honestly zero chance that they're going to use them. He says nothing frustrates local hoopers more than seeing basketball hoops with no nets or a net that has seen better days. He says, I started this program back in 2020 before I was with the Edmonton Stingers. Reed is the former CEO of the Edmonton Stingers. He says, I had nothing more than a ladder in my trunk and a bunch of nets. And he says, I started to refresh hoops on my lunch breaks and after work, and the program started to grow substantially. Of course, when I joined the Stingers, he says, we are now closing in on 1,000 nets put up or replaced. Can you imagine that? 1,000 nets they've replaced at their own cost. I mean, you can obviously donate to the program if you feel led. They put a little sticker on the backboard letting them know who's responsible for that fresh nets. He says, as we're heading into winter season in Canada, I'm moving the program indoors, and I would love to get the word out to schools and community gyms that we can provide and replace their basketball nets at zero cost to them. He says Spalding Canada and Sport Factor have signed up to support our program, so we can even take it beyond the city of Edmonton. He says, I think that it really has the legs to go Canada-wide, and he says, and support on Real Talk would go a long way to making this happen. He says you can check out our website at freshnets.ca if you'd like to support them, but even cooler, if you're in the Edmonton area and you know of a hoop that needs a fresh net, you can go ahead and submit the address, and I would go so far as to guarantee that Reed or one of his volunteers will be out there installing a fresh net. Positive Reflections is presented by our friends at Kuby Renewable Energy. You can get a free solar quote today by visiting kubyenergy.ca. Hey, we want you to mark on your calendar a couple of things as we wrap for the week here. Coming up on Thursday, it's the return of our group chat roundtable. We're going to do a year in review, a look ahead to 2024. It's going to be a ton of fun. And if you're a Real Talk patron, if you support us on Patreon, circle your calendar for this Friday. It's a special morning just for you. This week, you'll be getting an email to your inbox with an exclusive Zoom link. It's our annual Real Talk Patreon Zoom holiday party. Friday morning, we're going to get the festivities underway. We'll have trivia games. We'll have some open line Q&A time. We're going to be giving away some prizes. It's one of the ways that we thank you for supporting us on Patreon. You can learn more about that by checking out our website, ryanjesperson.com. Just click on Connect. Thanks for being a part of some difficult but important conversations today, friends. From the bottom of our hearts, we love you. We'll see you tomorrow.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson. Executive producer Josh Dunford. Technical producer John Hicks. General Manager Katie